Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here to begin our series of positional reviews for the 2023 season. A good season, I think, at least from most people's regard. I know a lot of people are very disappointed with the ending, as am I. But we're going to start with the defensive line today, and here joining me for that, as appropriate, is Brandon Croxton. Brandon, how you doing?
Hey Ken, great to be here and always excited to talk D-line.
There you go. All right. So I think the defining characteristic of these defensive line and the way I'm going to remember them from all the Ravens defensive lines of all time is that these five guys were really Iron Men. Not only did they play a lot of snaps, and we'll get into that, but they divided all the snaps among just five players.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. Usually, most seasons, five D linemen is just not enough. I mean, most teams need seven, eight, maybe even 10 D linemen if it's a particularly injury-filled season. But for five guys to play all the D line snaps, that's pretty impressive. Um, you know, shows the durability that all of them had and the stamina of them taking all of those snaps over the entire course of the season from just five guys is pretty impressive.
This year, Brent Urban looks like he did play all 17 games. So all five of the defensive linemen, as far as I can tell, with the exception of Broderick Washington, who was sit a healthy scratch for one game, so
Hmm.
played every game. The other thing I mentioned, the number of snaps. If you add up the total number of snaps divided by the total number of plays, which is what I've done, the Ravens averaged 2.20 defensive line snaps per play. If you break that down a little further, that means the average Ravens defensive lineman had to play 44% of the snaps for the year. Now, there are certain Iron Men across the league who play a lot more than that, but 44% of the snaps for a rotational defensive lineman is pretty darn high.
Yeah, absolutely. You, Especially when you consider, you're including backups in that that get very little, and you have guys like Matabike, who I think crossed the 60% for the first time in his career,
Yeah.
and I think Pierce was right around there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to fill that in, Madavika was at 65% and Pierce at 55%. Those are
Mhm.
very high totals for players like that. And I think we also, from what happened this year, by the way, one of the reasons that 2.20 is so high is that the Ravens didn't have a lot of 3 and 4 outside linebacker packages this year. There's kicking an outside linebacker inside. Uh, what I would call rush nickel is very common, where they had only one defensive lineman. A lot of teams do it. The Ravens did not do it, largely due to a shortage of outside linebackers this season. They had three guys they really wanted to rotate all the pass rush snaps for, and they didn't. They wanted to not overtax them. So only a handful of snaps the whole year were those guys all on together.
Right. Yeah. In years past, like with Wink Martindale, we often saw the race car packages where they had four offensive
Hmm.
linemen on the field I'm sorry, outside linebackers on the
Yes.
field at one time, and maybe in those packages you might have one defensive lineman or zero rushing the passer, and they were pretty consistent about having two defensive linemen at the 1 and 3 technique for every pass rush down. So, yeah, yeah, it's
Okay.
interesting.
Getting a small amount of feedback on your end. Are you tapping
Okay,
something or something is clicking in? But anyway, we continue.
okay,
Just some
okay.
technical problems that occasionally occur here. We try and solve them on the fly and not do the editing here. Uh, if you think about where this line was last year, particularly going into 2004, as it appeared where they would be heading into 2024, going as appeared where they'd be in 2023, it's remarkable. So going to camp last year, only Travis Jones was signed for the 24 season.
Mhm,
Now, Washington signed during camp to an extension, which was a big relief at the time. Thought it was a huge
mhm.
step forward. Pierce re-signed during the regular season, of course, and now it looks like Matabike may be tagged and may stay a Raven because his value is beyond even what the tag value is. There's a pretty good chance he plays for the Ravens this year. There's a very good chance that he gets tagged if he doesn't sign a long term deal prior to that if they can't work it out. And then Brent Urban, another guy, he's a free agent, but he may well be back as well.
Right, exactly. Uh, yeah, I think the big question heading into this offseason will be about Matabike, whether they are able to sign him to a long-term deal, or even if he plays on the franchise tag. I mean, that would really kind of hurt things that they want to do to improve the team in other positions, but probably keeping him is probably the number one priority for them at this point. And yeah, he's vitally important because he was just so vital to this defense and had such a huge year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll talk about each of these players individually, but how about Anthony Weaver? That's the other big loss, I think, for the Ravens. It really looked like my prediction all along would have been they would have lost one, and then it looked like they might get away with none because McDonald was cruising to the finish line with only two jobs still open, and the
Hmm.
Seahawks really entered late in the interview process for him, and then eventually took him, and his deal was incredible in terms of what he got as a first time head coach. But then Anthony Weaver, I understand that he probably wanted to be the defensive coordinator in Baltimore, and it might have been a case of either him or Zach Orr. But it's also just knowing who that guy is as a leader of men and whatnot. It's a shame to lose him from the Ravens staff.
Yeah, he's a great leader, and I mean very proactive when in practicing. You see him. It looks like the defensive lineman and him, wants to jump in on a drill and just do the drill with these guys. But he's very hands-on, a great teacher of, as well as a great leader. He's going to be missed, and you could see the improvement of, particularly Travis Jones, and the development of Broderick Washington over the last couple of years. But yeah, he's going to be missed, and finding good defensive line coaches that can motivate a defensive line to work hard in practice, work hard in training camp, and to figure out the rotation, the best rotation for them during the season, and keep them healthy and fresh during the season is such a big challenge, and he really excelled at that this year, and hopefully the Ravens can fill that for next year.
Yep. Yep. Very, very big position they filled. That's one of the things. I mean, Harbaugh's has some coaches have been lost, and obviously, the fire Harbaugh people, as if they needed any more fuel to the fire. That the loss wasn't enough. We'll point to the coaching and say, no, we're letting the wrong coaches go, and we should let Harbaugh go, and promote McDonald and this and that. I mean, I want to point out to folks that Harbaugh is the one. His silo, and organizationally, the Ravens are very responsibility defined in terms of how they make decisions like this. It's Harbaugh's silo where those hirings are being made. I mean, he's the one who brought together this coaching staff as it is and created this incredible pool of promotable people
Hmm.
that, of course, they got snatched up after the Ravens had a big year. And he'll probably lose more in the future. That's how the Shanahan and McVay and Reed and Landry and Lombardi, coaching teams, trees develop. Who's the Giants coach who had both Lombardi and Landry as his offensive and defensive coordinator in the 58
That
championship game? It wasn't Weeb. No,
was
Weeb was a
it.
coach of the
We
Colts.
wasn't the coach. Yeah. Boy, I don't know, but yes, I do know I do know that story. I can't remember that head coach that had them though. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
anyway, some credit has to go to Harbaugh for a fantastic hiring job, and if that has to be replicated, so be it. And I think that he's what he's earned as much as anything else. First of all, is some freaking respect, but second of all, is how about some money? Not for his personal salary. He makes a ton of money already, so I'm not saying that. But how about some money from Bisciotti invested in additional position coaches that'll really bring value to the organization? I think it played out this year. They hired Chuck Smith. Denard, Wilson is gone, and Weaver, of course, and just they all deserve some off cap money to help develop their staffs. I hope they'll spend some in scouting in the front office as well, because the guys they develop there, whether it's analytics or Ortiz in the scouting area, the other people under DaCosta, terrific, terrific talent, and they really need to spend outside the cap where they can to derive advantages against the rest of the league.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I find the fire Harbaugh contention a little bit silly. Also, he's absolutely one of the five best coaches in the NFL. I mean, he's a great leader, and being able to improve this team through coaching and through being that teacher and finding the Chuck Smiths that just focus on pass rush, finding guys like Denard Wilson that just focused on the D backs, like finding these guys and really figuring out proper roles and developing that staff and being able to be. And when you develop a good staff and you have good coaches, you're gonna lose good coaches because other
Mhm.
teams want to follow what you're doing and they see the success that you're having, and it's a natural byproduct. And kudos to him for always going out and looking to find the best coach to come up behind, because it, one of the dirty secrets in the NFL is not all coaches do that. They hire friends, they hire even relatives, they hire guys that they're with the same, they have the same agent, so they want to help their agent out and find a guy in their network. And Harbaugh goes far and wide to find really a lot of the best coaches out there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's also been the complaint that who's going to want to work for Harbaugh, because he's a guy that Bisciotti will never get rid of, and I mean, we just proved it out. Look, I mean, you've had this plethora of people who wanted to work. Anthony Weaver was wait for what I would say is an extra year at least as a defensive line coach to try and become defensive coordinator. You have Zach Orr sitting there. McDonald went on basically a 1-year internship back to Michigan, which, by the way, incredibly creative problem solving there to get it done. I don't know whose idea it was. Whether it might have been Jim Harbaugh's idea. I don't even care. But it was a wonderful idea to get that. And in the end, John Harbaugh would have had the ability to say yes or no to that, to promote him too early if that was what was going to happen here. But it just, timing wise, it really worked out perfectly. And thinking back on this, I'm thinking maybe when Wink left and he said what they mutually parted ways. I don't honestly believe Wink was fired. I think Harbaugh would have been fine with him playing out the last year of his contract. But I think Wink saw the handwriting on the wall that he was going to be replaced after the next season by McDonald, because they'd already gone to set that up.
Right.
And he said, I don't want to do that. So why don't you let me go now? And I'll just sign a multi-year deal somewhere else. I'm still a hot coordinator at this point. And, honestly, I'm not trying to be revisionist in terms of history, but I always thought that, the multi-year deal was what really played heavily there. And it's now pretty apparent why that might have been.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And to counter that is, why wouldn't you want to come work for Harbaugh? Because it is a stepping stone for so many players. I mean, I'm sorry, for so many coaches.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've seen the guys that have come through here. Leslie Frazier came through here as a defensive back coach and got hired as a D coordinator. Our new nemesis, Steve Spagnuolo, uh, he was, I think, a D-backs coach or maybe a linebacker coach, but he was a defensive assistant on this, and he got the defensive coordinator job with the Chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
And then you were seeing Wilson and Weaver coming in, and they've gotten promotions too at other places. So it's a great stepping stone. You you may or may not ever get the succession into the head coaching job for the Ravens, but I mean, there's 31 other jobs out there, and we seem to be filling we seem to be filling a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah. And, the point I want to make sure is emphasized in what you just said, which is really important, is that a position coaching role is a stepping stone to a coordinator role, and you definitely don't have that with a lot of teams. I've often thought that the Ravens defensive coordinator position should be one of the most highly sought after jobs in the entire NFL period. Coming into a great structure, they've learned and they've built culture there that is still here with Harbaugh, and so whoever steps into that job, whatever young guy is fortunate enough to step into that job, is on the fast track to be a head coach somewhere. And that's why people want it. And if you don't want that for our team, what's wrong with you? I mean, seriously, what's wrong with you if you don't want that for our team? And it stability at the top and good hiring decisions at the top that aren't driven by, BS. Like, I don't want to have this guy outshine me, or I want my relative to get it first, or whatever. I mean, I think, it's so critically important and central to management of the franchise. And I'm glad Bisciotti basically is in charge of this, because even though Harbaugh is in charge of his own silo, I'm sure he does have to respond to Bisciotti at least annually about why he made certain decisions about personnel in his group. So if he wants to run his department differently, if this were a company, think about it that way. You can do it. You can pretty much do it however you want, subject to budgetary constraints usually. If you want more money, you got to ask. And if you make some questionable hiring decisions, which are causing the group to screw up as a whole, then you have to answer for that. That's all that ownership should provide. But they should be responsible to ask all of those questions in a good way. And I think they have. I think, clearly the Ravens' success on the coaching side has been remarkable over the years, and they really had a little bit of a coaching tree going under Billick at one point when Marvin Lewis left and whatnot, and Nolan, Del Rio to be head coaches elsewhere. It's been a great run for this organization. I think I have to credit, while a lot of it goes to Harbaugh and the correct hiring of coaches, I have to credit Bisciotti for being a guy who demands that out of his number two.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. The Ravens defensive coordinator position that's one of the premier stepping stones for head coaches. It's right up there probably with Andy Reid offensive coordinator, and a McVay coordinator too. So yeah,
except Bieniemy still has not been a head coach, right?
He still is not. He's been the outlier, but I mean, so many guys after that, before him have gone on. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly the Reid staff in Philadelphia was fairly legendary in terms of it coming to. But anyway, let's get back to the defensive line here. Let's talk a little bit about the guy who's on everybody's minds right now is Justin Madubuike and the great year he had. I mentioned he played 65% of the snaps this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was an all-pro in every sense of the word. He improved as a run defender, and he had just an absolute awesome season as a pass rusher. He had a career high 13 sacks, and he tied the NFL record with at least a half a sack in 11 straight games. He broke the record for any interior defensive lineman with that sack streak, and
he tied it actually with Chris Jones. But yeah.
Okay. I thought okay. Well, yeah. So all right. So, well, still very impressive to him and Chris Jones to be the only ones there. And, also was second on the team with 64 pressures, right behind Clowney, and, played the most snaps of his career. I think you mentioned he played 65% of the snaps during the season, and it was, just a great season from him.
So one of the things I was worried about before the year, and I got to admit, people are always looking like, when am I going to say I was wrong about something? Here's one. Okay. That on Madubuike in 2022 played 59% of the snaps. So he went from 59 to 65. Two things happened in 22. One is he didn't play as well in games where he played a lot of snaps. Okay. Number two was he didn't play as well at the end of the year. Whatever fatigue elements were part of his season in 22 that contributed to that did not happen again in 23. And that is a massive jump forward. Obviously, had all kinds of per snap productivity gains this year, but the actual ability to play, 6 percentage points more of snaps, which is 10% more snaps, really, is remarkable. And I did not think that would be the way it would go. I thought, if he played 47 to 50% of the snaps, he'd be more productive than if he played 59 and keeping him on pass rushing downs. They played him on tons of run downs as well here this year.
Yeah, I think that's a great testament to his conditioning in the offseason. Whatever he was doing in the offseason to improve and get himself into playing shape and to play so many snaps and play them at it's even a higher level than he was playing last year. That's a real testament to all the things that he was doing as a in the off season, and you know, that's one of those role models that you want to keep on your team. I think you know so many players need to really learn from Matabike, and I mean even Lamar Jackson is you go into the off season and you work your butt off to improve a couple of areas, and you can see just a huge jump in your success as a player.
Yeah, well, I hope he is one of those guys long term who buys into the off season is just the second season kind of thing, and keeps his eye on the ball. A lot of players, I think, as they get older, they probably know they have to keep their bodies in shape, but they may not be trying as much to go for positional coaching when they're 28, 29 years old, 30 years old, certainly, to try and learn new things that they don't know. I, I don't know if there's a good example of a player who's continued to do that for his whole career. There's certainly lots of guys who've been workout fanatics and have kept up. Matt Burke's career as a Raven, into his 30s was really remarkable in terms of beating the curve of decline, of doing that.
Hmm.
But I don't know that there's guys who are still trying to pick up the positional secrets from a new perspective as they get older, the way we've seen from players like Lamar at a young age, or some other pass rushers certainly at a young age.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, loved what he did as a run defender this year. I thought he was a lot better than he had been the previous year. He's certainly a much more effective penetrator. And the Ravens, a mix of body types and a mix of styles is nice in terms of defending the run. The Ravens didn't commit a lot of resources to defending the run this year. But one of the things they did is they mixed up some styles, particularly in the base package. The base package, you got a couple outside linebackers who did a pretty good job of setting the edge. Most of the time, we were talking about either Robinson or Clowney on one side with Harrison on the other. But on the inside,
Hmm.
Matabike was there a lot of that time. He's there with a very different type of two-gapper in Pierce and a very different type of space denier in Urban, who uses his leverage very well, uses his long arms very well to maintain his position. He's extremely conscious defender in terms of creating space for others as opposed to making a play for himself. Matabike is a C3 tech, shed 3 tech, make tackle kind of guy.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about pass defense, but if you had anything more to say about
Okay.
run defense, I thought we'd move on.
Oh yeah. Like they had struggles as far as a little bit in run defense as a unit, but when it came time for them to actually stop the run, they were really able to do it and do it
Mhm.
pretty effectively. You could see it in certain drives. Look at the second half of the Rams game. I mean, even this Chiefs game, the Chiefs had a lot more success in the first half than they did in the second half running the ball. And so when it came time to shut down the run, they were really able to do it.
You know, that's a great point, and there are game script considerations for what happened there as well. I mean, obviously, the Ravens gave up, I think, 4.5 yards for the year, and I have to look to see if that's exactly correct, but it's about that. The Ravens did not have many opposing kneels the entire year. They did not have many times where the opponents ran into the Ravens when the Ravens knew it was coming because they're trying to run out the clock because they were never behind the whole year, basically.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
there wasn't a case of they had some of those on the margin, really easy opportunities to stop the run that accrue to a team over the course of a normal season. They didn't have those. And I don't think their yards per carry was too much out of line otherwise. It's just another point I would make about it. But even more, I'd make the point that their pass defense was so much better because of the stylistic or schematic choices they made to give up some yards against the run, that it completely made sense.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
In terms of Matabike, there are you at all concerned about his a lot of his sacks and a lot of his play requiring the Ravens compound pressure to develop?
Um, so I think it's probably going to be unfair to expect him to have 13 sacks a year for the next 3 or 4 years. That's probably not likely, but he is a guy that he's by far the Ravens' best inside penetrator, and he's a very good in the league as a whole. He's a very good inside pass rush guy. You could you could probably expect, I'd say, maybe somewhere between 7 to 10 sacks a year. Um, at as many pressures, or maybe even a little bit more over than he had this year, but the sack total is going to go down. This was a career year for him. It's not really fair to expect 13 sacks a year, or to even improve upon that. But he's still very effective, and you really have to weigh on what you're able and willing to pay for such a good interior pass rusher.
I'm with you all the way on that. I guess Jadeveon Clowney and Van Noy and Owe, for that matter, who are all kind of good pressure rate guys and not necessarily great finishers, really helped Matabike this year. I mean, Matabike had great follow up pressure. He chases the quarterback down very well for an interior defensive lineman, extremely quick. Seems to, um, have a iron lock on a quarterback when he gets his hands on them. They just don't get away. And I'm thinking about this now. I think he did let one get away in the final game of the year where Pierce or somebody else ended up getting a portion of the sack. Yeah, I think he did, because I think he was party to both sacks, and one of them he didn't have any part of it, and the other part he had half with Pierce. But he's a guy who's certainly, as the quarterback's leaving the pocket, that's still Matabike hunting ground there in terms of being able to take down a quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. And it, he's so quick that it's not a sure thing that a quarterback can turn the corner if Matabike is in pursuit. So yeah.
So anyway, they will. I'm sure they will try and sign him before they have to tag him. No one ever really wants to be tagged. We saw some of the acrimony that created. Wasn't just that. I mean, obviously they weren't agreeing on a number between Lamar and the team, but it's really something that would be much better if they can sign him early and they don't have any part where he's on the tag, because money will have to be manipulated immediately as soon as that happens, and then they'll be limited in terms of what other moves they can make for 2024. Now, I don't expect them to make a lot of signings in during the early period this year, and the large reason being because each one has a potential offset to their fine set of compensatory picks they'll get in 25.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. The Ravens are rarely that first day of free agent wave type of team when it comes to signing players. Anyway, they're great about figuring out, picking and choosing the guys to sign. If they sign somebody early, they're it's rarely that they do it to um, that hurts the compensatory pick formula.
Mm-hmm.
They'll sign guys to 1 year deals or something like that, and then later, and then they also great at waiting till after June 1 to sign guys as well, and you know they they're very smart about not being about being patient in free agency, and not improving the team in every way possible.
Right.
And sometimes that's deciding, is this guy worth a big money contract and us losing a third or fourth round pick a year from now?
Yeah. Yeah, they have done remarkably well. The one time where they kind of violated their own rule was with the Nelson Aguilar signing last year, where they gave up a
Mhm.
6, and they knew exactly what was happening at the time. They knew it was a fairly significant amount of trade. I can't say it didn't work. I think the Ravens ended up getting approximately the amount of value minimum that I would like to have seen. But I got to say there's been some things recently where and most notably the Orioles trade for Corbin Burns. They gave up. I know every Oriole fan outside of me seems to absolutely love that trade, but the Orioles gave up an unbelievable amount of young talent in the three bagger of Ortiz, Hall, and a 34th overall pick. That for that to make obvious sense to me. Now, Ortiz might not have had a spot to play in Baltimore. Maybe they could have figured it out. Maybe they couldn't have. But it's also a case of maybe they could have gotten full value for him trading him somewhere else. And 1 year out of Corbin Burns, which is what the Orioles are going to get out of this, could look like a very, very bad trade if Ortiz ends up being a ball player. So, the Ravens, I think, are extremely well positioned in terms of this. But most importantly, since they draft well, they always have to make the heartbreaking decisions of letting players go and picking the ones that are really central to their success to maintain those, letting the other ones go. And they've just done a remarkable job of that. And then, other teams talk about how the Ravens have raped the compensatory draft pick system for, X number of picks over a 20-year period. Well, guess what? That's a byproduct of great drafting, guys. That's what happens. That's why it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Like it's always important to have good problems. The Ravens drafting so well and making these hard decisions on who to keep and who to lose is a good problem to have. I'd rather us be fretting over losing Meta BK or Queen
Mhm,
or Stone,
mhm.
and rather than us looking at it's like who are we going to sign? None of our draft picks from the 2020 season have panned out. Now we have three or four holes that we need to fill through free agency, and we're going to overspend for those. So have good problems. Try to have as many good problems as you can, and drafting is a good problem to have.
Welcome to the Arizona Cardinals organization. What you just described there. That's exactly what we don't want. Well, let's move on. Let's talk a little bit about Michael Pierce, who had a great year. I thought 55% of the snaps we mentioned early. Probably no move in season was I any more happy about than re-signing Pierce in December. I think it was December anyway, for 7.5 million for 2 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Like he's still one of the best run stoppers in the league, and it was it was disappointing, that they had to renegotiate his deal and at the beginning of the season to kind of make him a free agent at the end of the year, but them being able to keep him and have him re-sign him for a couple of more years. That's very important because yeah, at the beginning of the year they only had Travis Jones signed, and
Mhm.
now they're gonna have at least three back and possibly four if Matabike,
That could
or
even be
and
five.
possibly five.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could even be five. Yeah, because they could still sign Urban as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, One of the things that comes up every time we talk about Michael Pierce, well, not every time, but frequently we talk about Michael Pierce is his weight. And he lists now at 355 pounds. I think basically the Ravens are past the point where they're trying to make excuses about his weight. Syracuse, they had it 342 or something. And Adams, those guys never wanted to weigh in, by the way. They never wanted to weigh in. Adams was up there
Mhm.
around 360 pounds. He was a very large man, just a coke machine of a man. But Pierce is in that same mold. Obviously, he has come to camp overweight before, where he could barely, basically move on the field. But I thought we saw pretty good mobility from Pierce at his weight this year.
He, he's an incredible athlete. There, there was one next gen stat that had him running at I think 17 miles per hour at he was chasing down a running back or chasing down a wide receiver. I can't remember the exact play
Mhm.
that it was, but I mean 350 I laugh at. He's probably closer to 360, 370, if not more. And for him to be moving that fast at whatever the proper weight is, nobody wants to get that's an incredible athlete there, and
Yeah.
nobody wants to get in front of that either.
Right. And definitely locks on and takes people down as a tackler. Um, I don't know if you've looked at any of the statistics, but particularly for interior defensive linemen, it looks like PFF is going through a period right now where they are probably changing their definitions of missed tackles some. And so I go out there because there's multiple sources on missed tackles, as I say often. PFR has them and PFF has them. And you can obviously, anybody can keep them themselves. And there is definitely a component of judgment and subjectivity to calling for missed tackles. So what I try and do is I usually try and quote the PFF missed tackles most of the time because of all organizations that do it, that is a group that I trust to do it the same every time, even though I think they're extremely harsh. And one of the things we see with the defensive line is try and organize the defensive line and find out where the median is for tackling. It does not look like they have adjusted their system to like current levels of missed tackles. So they may be looking at a 3-year backwards looking average and then comparing people to that. And they say, oh, look, his missed tackle rate is 13.9%. And the average was only 9% for his position before. And now he shows up with a 52 grade or something. And Pierce is one of the guys who still is okay as he comes out on that. But a lot of defensive linemen look really bad in that category. So before you say, oh my God, all the Ravens suck at this, or they're these aren't good, just sort the position if you have the PFF package and take a look at what the missed tackle rates look like. You're going to say, oh, the whole league can't tackle, the whole league of interior line.
Yeah. And plus you also have to think about the front lines, their job isn't necessarily to just make the tackle. Their
Right.
job is to clog up holes. Their job is to slow down the runner, or slow down the running back, or slow down whoever the ball carrier is. But they're often engaged with an offensive lineman while they're doing that. So they may be trying to tackle with one arm, or just a shoulder or something like that. So a missed tackle rate on a defensive lineman is not as bad as it would be for a linebacker or a safety or somebody like that, where their job is to make the tackle and bring the ball carrier down, as opposed to clogging up space and kind of making a mess, is what defensive linemen do.
Right. So Pierce is a guy typically who is the responsibility of two people in most blocking assignments. Usually you won't get away without that. What Pierce has been, I think, very adept at doing is not letting one of two blockers get to level 2. And this used to be Casey Hampton's thing. He would hold, just relentlessly. Casey Hampton probably had the most defensive holding calls against him of just about any lineman of his era, because he would just be there. He'd make no bones about trying to take out 2 for 1 on his thing. And the Steelers linebackers then would flow behind that, whether it was Ferrier or Foote or whoever it might have been at the time, and flow to the ball very naturally if he could get away with his hold. But Pierce doesn't really have to do that. It doesn't seem that way as much. I wouldn't say there's a high degree of penetration in his game, but he knows how to deny space when he has a shoulder in either way on an offensive lineman, force that second lineman to maintain the block. And a lot of times, I'm not saying he's perfect at this, because nobody is, but he can prevent or delay that either guard or center from moving up into level 2 and taking out a linebacker. And that's where that's taking the other team's rooks away from them if they can do that.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's very important. Yeah.
Pierce, underrated as a pass rusher his whole career. I think it's honestly been quite a strength of him, but he's never really been used as a pass rusher until this season. He mentioned, I don't think I actually did mention, he's 30 whatever now, and he just played his most snaps of his entire career this year. And the big upgrade in snap total for him came from the Ravens' lack of 3 outside linebacker packages, and the fact that for most of the season, most of the early part of the season anyway, he was Matabike's running mate on third down. So he'd be the other defensive lineman in the game. I thought they had remarkable synergy as a stunting duo. A lot of times he was the over, Matabike's the under. That creates an enormous dilemma for the two linemen responsible for blocking those two.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were just talking about Pierce's athleticism. Like, he, he wasn't always the guy that'll be the under guy that just runs into, that guard
Mhm.
or center. He's looping around, and that's a lot of man to be looping,
Mhm.
and to be trying to stop when he's starting to get full head of steam like that. So, yeah, like he's is he doesn't look like the prototypical athlete, but he's an incredible athlete at his size.
Let's take a moment because I sometimes talk about this, but I'm sure I'm losing people in terminology or description without a picture. But let's talk about the responsibilities of the underneath guy in a stunt, a twist, whatever you want to call it, a
Hmm.
game of any sort, who may be coming from three tech, and that would be the case with Matabike usually, crossing the face of a guard and slamming into the shoulder of a center. Talk a little bit about that from your own perspective playing that position.
Sure. So basically, what you're trying to do, one is you're trying to set a pick. It's essentially setting a pick for in basketball. Like you crash into that center, and you open up the shoulders of that center. So one, because the center is expecting to engage in the other defensive lineman. So instead, he's getting picked from the side and he's not expecting it. And basically, you're attacking and you're hitting the one shoulder of the offensive lineman instead of a lot of times either two what we call two gapping, which is just engaging with an offensive lineman and you're man on man. You're basically your whole man is taking on half of the man of that center, and so it opens it up. The looper goes around. You're
So,
confusing
so
that
when you
guard.
say when you say he goes around, let's be careful here. That looper is going to come from one tech on the other side, and he's going to
Yes,
loop around past the guard whose face
yes,
you crossed.
yes, and you're replacing where your three tech was. The looper is replacing that man, and what happens is that guard is now tilting inside to the pick guy essentially, and so it allows that the looper to get around and basically only only either go completely around the guard, or again you're only engaging half of that man with your whole body,
Mhm.
and so you have a strength advantage and you're able to push. One defensive lineman pushing with both of their hands is a lot is can create more force than any offensive lineman with just one shoulder or one arm. So you have a strength advantage, you have a leverage advantage, and that enables you to get through the offensive lineman.
Okay, and the underneath guy then, as that guard is peeled off of what effectively you could call it a double team, but the center didn't know it was coming necessarily. Which, by the
Right.
way, knowing your feelings about centers and what kind of cheap shot artists they are, I'm sure it must feel good. No
It's
one's
very fun. It's very fun to get them every now and then.
so so the center's kind of got half of that three tech coming across. The guard has half of them, but they both kind of have turned shoulders. The center because he didn't
Yes.
expect it. The guard because he had to turn inside to catch that crossing player, the player who was crossing his face.
Yes.
And so neither of them has that great a block on the underneath guy, right?
Right. Yeah. Because both guys only have one one of their arms or one of their shoulders engaged with that guy. So in in order for basically to make that block, I mean that's a heck of a team block between the guard and the center
Mhm.
in order to get that guy, in order to get the pick guy without him being able to push through one of them, at least one of them.
And then the guard still has an additional responsibility. Even if
Responsibility
he can
to get.
hand off that underneath guy, he still
Yeah,
has to get then back. It's almost like a
he still
reach
have to
block.
get the
Yeah.
looper.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All right. And so in your experience, and I've always said that I think how I watch film, I always see that the underneath guy is typically the guy who derives the biggest advantage from the twist, which is surprising to people because that guy's kind of setting a pick. But oftentimes those
Hmm.
guys are the really dominant three techs who know exactly how to take care of half a guy when that's all that's left on them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, just think about basketball on a pick and roll. When the picker sets that pick, he rolls to the basket, and a lot of times you don't the roll guy doesn't have has a better angle to get an easy shot on a basket. So when the so when the with the guy with the ball, he can just easily pass it in. It's kind of the same concept because when you bang into that center, you've now basically opened up a hole that you can just push forward, and you have really a direct angle right to the quarterback in that instance. And yeah.
All right, great. I'm glad we took a few minutes to do this because I think your explanation of it adds a lot to how people can understand this. But great stuff, Brandon. I really appreciate having you on for that.
Yeah.
One of the let's get back to Pierce for a second. Fantastic game versus Arizona. Stopped 2 4th-and-1 plays individually in that game. Might have been his
Mhm.
best game as a Raven ever.
Yeah, he was a force that game. I think did he have a sack that game as well, or I think or maybe he had another big play. I think maybe a pass block or something. But I mean, fourth down stuffs is that's monster stuff right there.
And I'm thinking I could be wrong about this, but one of them was a stuff was just a
Hmm.
takedown on that. And I think the other was a deflected pass on 4th-and-1 that turned the ball
Okay.
over. So
Okay.
either way, incredible game. And Pierce, a guy who he seems to be very comfortable two gapping. He seems to really like the bull rush. Incredible at generating that leverage underneath. Maybe talk just for another second about what is a defensive lineman who's a little shorter, still has, I guess, decent arm length in Pierce's case, but is a little shorter and very heavy. What's his best angle to get leverage? What's his best mechanism to get leverage?
Well, as they always say, low man wins, and if offensive lineman has a higher pass set and they're a little bit higher, he can kind of he can push that offensive lineman's arm up
Mm-hmm.
to to so that offensive lineman doesn't have as much power, and he can rip through or even just bull himself through, because if you know being the lower man, you have that leverage, and it's hard for an offensive lineman to gain any power with their hips or 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 their legs when when they're higher and they don't have the advantage of having both of their arms on a guy. So
It's kind of one of the first things they teach you, even in seventh grade football, is don't stand up as an offensive lineman. You
right,
know,
exactly.
you
Yeah,
just
yeah,
you want to stay low. But that is one of the things
constantly.
I love to see on film is when run play or pass play, either one, I love to see it. Is when a defensive tackle who really out levers his opponent just makes the offensive lineman just stand straight up, get that reverse
Hmm.
C in his back here, which is a good thing in terms of dying slowly in the pass rush, but is something you definitely don't want as your first choice as a
Yeah,
blocker.
yeah, absolutely.
All right, outstanding. Let's go and talk
Mhm.
about Travis Jones a little bit. I know we're running a little long here.
Okay.
Hopefully, we'll get this going. Big step forward
Mhm.
in year two. I thought 39% of the snaps he played initially only as a backup nose, but we saw him a little bit as a three tech this year. A few plays in there where he was on the field with Pierce. I don't have an exact count on that, but I need to look back and do it, and I need to exclude certain plays where they had four down linemen and they were in goal line or short yardage or something where they were obviously defending the run. But I still thought we would see some of that this year.
Yeah, I thought he was, I thought he was solid as a on the against the run. He was primarily the nose tackle, but did play, like you said, played a little bit of three tech, and he's improving as a pass rusher. I think he can be a good three tech. And I guess depending on whether Matabike is here or not, like I think he would be the primary guy to kind of step in Matabike's role as the pass rushing three tech if he's gone. But he's a different player. Matabike is more quickness. He is
Mhm,
power. Yeah,
mhm.
he is a powerful, powerful guy, and he he's got some quickness to him, but I mean his game is power, and he I thought he was a breakout candidate. He definitely took a step forward. I still love the potential of him. Maybe in year three or maybe even year four, to be to be kind of more of a complete defensive lineman.
Yeah, to me, I don't even think he has gains that he has to consolidate this year. I'd really look, and I think that about a lot of players. I think that if they could be the same as they were last year, it would be terrific. But in
Mhm.
his case, that's not the case at all. I think he could take another step forward for sure, and there are things that he can improve, and there's also ways schematically I think he could be used that'll emphasize more of what he is. If I could quickly go back to what he did at Connecticut, he was the guy that you had to figure out how to block in Connecticut's defense. They didn't have much else. And so he was constantly getting double teams and whatnot. I think that served him very well at the NFL level. And I think that the Ravens are going to really want to build a lot of their defense about figuring out how to get him individual matchups the way potentially that Chris Jones gets that treatment. He won't be ever probably the pass rusher that Chris Jones is, but he still could be a force, I think, if you can get him consistently one-on-one with a guard or a center, even in some situations.
Yeah. I mean, even if he's able to just draw double teams and he can't be blocked by one guy, that's a huge benefit to a
Oh, yeah.
team, even if he's not the guy that's, finishing plays or getting sacks. I mean, if people can't block him with one guy, then you're you can work around that all day as a defense. Yeah.
Yeah, you do. You do. It's you need some guys who can take two blocks, but you also need some guys who can make plays. And I think I love the if he truly can take two guys and do what Pierce does, I think very well in terms of not getting really moved, making it very difficult for that second lineman to get to level two because there's a subtle difference between requiring two guys and really requiring one and a half guys, the way I talk about it. If there's a double team at the line of scrimmage, but it's very easy to get that even a large defensive tackle off his pins a little bit so that the one primary blocker gets him and the second guy can climb to level two. That's not nearly as valuable as, being what Tony Siragusa used to be described as 342 pounds if I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Anything else about Jones we missed on? Oh yeah, I mean he finished the year as Matabike's wingman in these passing situations, which I
Right.
thought is tremendous move forward for him in terms of what the coaching staff probably thinks about him. And it'll basically be, even though it won't be McDonald, it'll basically be a lot of the same people making decisions. Actually, it'd be no McDonald and no Weaver. That is a big difference, but it'll still be Zach Orr, who certainly has seen what he did last year. It'll be another linebackers coach who probably has seen if he's promoted from within. I haven't heard it yet who that guy is. Do you know if they've
Yeah.
designated him?
I don't think they've filled linebacker position yet. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great if that could be another place where they hire somebody really interesting and a good young opportunity there somewhere. But in the case of Jones, I mean, it's on tape what he can do now in terms of being the wingman in a three. And I don't think it's necessary that the Ravens are going to go back to 3 outside linebacker and 4 outside linebacker packages as often as they did with Wink.
Probably not. Yeah, I agree. I mean, especially if you have Matabike and Jones is a really nice interior. Can really push the pocket and create a lot of havoc inside without having to use an outside linebacker. So yeah. Yeah.
All right, couple guys we want to make sure we talk about. Brent Urban, extremely solid backup, who at age 32 tied for the third most snaps of his entire career. And he played 24.6% of the snaps, which doesn't seem like a lot. I think it was 309 total by PFF. I have him for a little bit less because I don't include penalties. But very solid year again for Urban. All right, I think Brandon's
I'm sorry.
adjusting something while I'm doing this. He's primarily used
I'm sorry.
as the 5 tech in the base package. Also plays a little bit of 3. You can't be exclusively a 5 tech in this league anymore because there just aren't enough base package snaps to make that a worthwhile opportunity. But he plays some 5, plays some 3. The other thing that Urban maybe was not recognized for is the Ravens played a lot of or not a lot, but they played some single outside linebacker packages this year with uncovered nickel, I would call it, where they played 3 down linemen and 1 outside linebacker instead of the normal 2 and 2. And it gives you a little better run defense if you do that. And Urban was typically the guy who was playing on the edge on those packages, and definitely something that has value. Still think Brandon's working on some things with regard to his setup here, and we'll just keep going. You tell me when you're ready, Brandon. Urban certainly early in his career made his name as a run defender, manages space well, creates plays for others much more than he makes them himself, but made them when it's necessary, and cleaned up for Clowney twice in that San Francisco game. Kind of a nice fitting, maybe the best game of his entire career, certainly the best game of the year for him, where he cleaned up twice to take down once, might have been once Purdy, once Darnold. I think we have Brandon back right now. So we're talking about Brandon Urban. Not sure how much of that you heard.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear any of that. So
okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you want me to just talk a little bit about a couple of notes I have?
Sure.
Yeah. So he had 3 sacks during the season, which was a career high for him, and actually 4 of the 5 defensive linemen had career highs in sacks this year. So that's pretty impressive stat. None of them, only Matabike really blew out their career highs, but the other 3, managed to get career highs. So, yeah, 3, and very solid at the 5 technique, and even played a little bit on the edge. And I don't know exactly what the formation is called. It was some kind of nickel formation where he was kind of the outside contain guy, and played solid there. He wasn't the best at keeping outside contain every time, but was did log some snaps there.
I call it the uncovered nickel. There's five defensive backs. You want to make sure you get that in every package you kind of call out. But it's 3 defensive linemen and 1 outside linebacker. We did talk a little bit about this. Just having the versatility to do that has real value. If you ever get yourself into trouble where you don't have a healthy set of outside linebackers, that was true to the Ravens for parts of this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think one of the other things you look at a player like Urban, and they could go into next season, they might draft a defensive lineman, in which case Urban could be on the outside looking in, depending on how health works out. But he also has been a very valuable guy at the end of the roster because he's a handshake guy. And they only have a certain number of players that really works for. It's the Daryl Worleys and used to be Anthony Levines of the world who didn't mind being cut every year and creating an extra roster spot essentially for the team to slip somebody else onto the team, then move him to IR, then you re-sign your handshake guy. And that additional fungibility of those roster spots at the end is extremely valuable to the team. The Ravens this year used every one of their 8 IR DTR spots, which I thought that number was way too high. I also thought it had been reduced because the Ravens had been taking advantage of the system. I thought the rest of the league basically was singling out the Ravens for this sort of treatment. But Urban is at the heart of allowing the Ravens to do that. Players like Urban with Daryl Worley and others are really there.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're very good about really churning the back end of that roster and getting value out of guys. And I mean, even the practice squad promotions, things like that. I think those 2 years when they were just decimated by injuries, they came out learning more about how to work that back end of the roster and came out better for it. And guys like Urban, are incredibly valuable because they become immediate. When you cut them, they become immediate free agents, and he can be a guy that's on the practice squad and gets call ups, or can even be signed to the active roster if somebody gets hurt. And of course, that's assuming that they draft or possibly bring in a free agent defensive lineman at some point. But yeah.
How would you rate the Ravens' chance, the likelihood that they'll? Okay, let's start with sign a free agent defensive lineman.
Okay, so of course Matabike, clouds everything. If they're able to retain Matabike, I think it's very low that they would sign
Mhm.
a free agent. I mean, maybe maybe a veteran minimum guy or close to something like that, but it wouldn't be a substantial free agent pick. And then, but I do think they would have a relatively good chance of drafting a guy, whether they sign Matabike or not.
All right. And I left out a group there, the undrafted guys, where the Ravens have been very good about finding a next player. One of the things I've been thinking about is, do they need to develop a new Patrick Ricard? And for
Mhm.
that, would they like to have another defensive lineman who can also give you time at fullback, if that's what you want? Or it really never seems to work out, as certainly
Mhm.
not as well as it did with Ricard, that you have a true emergency defensive lineman when you need one.
Mhm.
But early on in his career, that Ricard was that in some ways. He
Yeah.
he was going to multiple meetings, and he was there as needed. I don't see the Ravens, if they retain Matabike, I don't see the Ravens drafting a defensive lineman this year. And if they did, I think it would be very late in the draft. And by the way,
Mhm.
completely agree with you that bringing in a free agent defensive lineman for $1 million a year is the normal kind of a Ravens activity. You could also do it via the UDFA process, but it's somebody who
Mhm.
is one extra insurance policy for your last DL spot.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think you always want to be constantly having um, defensive linemen and young defensive linemen. It should be a draft and develop position. Um, like because having this year where you only had five defensive linemen playing, those are the rare years. This is the true outlier. You can't necessarily count on all five of your guys being healthy next year. Um, so you want to have somebody that's able to come in and play and make a reasonable contribution. So yeah, it could be. Even if you keep Matabike, I think it probably maybe a fourth, fifth round pick or later, or and they've been great at developing undrafted guys, and it's been a great landing spot for undrafted guys. I mean, Michael Pierce is one of them right there.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's they're really good at finding those guys. So yeah, yeah.
I'd certainly be excited about that. Let's move on. Last guy we want to talk about is Broderick Washington here, signed to a 3-year extension last OTAs/camp. I think it was actually at the beginning of camp they did it. And his 2024 salary is guaranteed. Now, the reason I say that is his three-year extension is really just starting. He played last year, I think, under the standard kind of a vet min. He got some signing bonus and whatnot, and then
Hmm.
his 3-year period starts now. So he's actually signed through 26. There is about a break even if they wanted to cut him next year, but this year there's a substantial amount of dead money if they cut him. So he's safe. He's not going anywhere. But he did take a step backwards in 2023 in some key metrics.
Hmm. Yeah, he this is a bit of a letdown year. Like 2021 and 22, he really flashed. He's been a reserve defensive lineman, but whenever he came in, he was really able to flash and make plays, stops for losses, or just really show that he was a capable player. And this year, like even when he was in there, you barely noticed him. It happens on occasions. Sometimes you see after a defensive lineman signs an extension. Sometimes they get a little fat and happy for lack of a better phrase of that. But yeah, yeah, he needs to bounce back this year because I mean the Ravens aren't going to tolerate the step back that he kind of had this year for multiple years after an extension.
Right. I wouldn't call this a crossroads season, but the Ravens could effectively replace him with a vet min guy at about the same dollar amount. And so it's going to there will be a question after the 2024 season for Washington. But in terms of the way he stepped back, his missed tackle rate was 7% in 2022, jumped to 17%. Now again, PFF may have changed their definition or something. I don't want to get too tied up in that. This one, though, there's no doubt about it. Batted passes, he had 6 in 2022, which is a terrific total, but
Hmm.
0 in 2023. Not good for multiple reasons. His defensive wins, now those are tackles that he makes, which don't keep the other team on schedule. Sometimes it's determined by expected points. I believe the PFF ones are decided by yardage relative to the old Football Outsiders definition. And he had 26 of those in 2022, but only 9 in 2023. So not making as many tackles. The tackles he's making are not as impactful in terms of for loss. That's obviously down. And his percentage of the defensive snaps was down to 35.6%. And I didn't actually look up what his percentage was the year before, but I know he didn't play as much in 2023. So, right now he's a pure backup run defender. They pretty much used him as a 3-tech run defender this season.
Yeah, 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 and yeah, you just gotta hope he kind of refines the form that he had the previous 2 years and takes that step forward because they're going to potentially they're really going to need him if they lose Matabike, and even if they're able to retain him, he would still be a valuable backup if he's able to find that form again.
Yeah. Yeah, and what would be if you're trying to set the expectations bar for Washington for this year? What would you like to see from him in terms of either role or playing time or productivity? Any measure that you'd call out for him?
So I'd want to see. I'd probably want to see him raise his snap percentage back up to at least in the 40s. Him be able to give Michael Pierce had a huge amount of snaps for a nose tackle. That's another worry about him being able to continue that year in and year out. Him being able to um, give give anybody across the defensive line a blow here and there and reduce their snaps and reduce their wear and tear. But come back to being that impactful player. Like, I mean, you just said like his defensive wins went from 26 to 9. Like you want to get that back up, at least in the high teens, if not in the 20s. And yeah, batted passes, it's a skill and it's a little bit of luck as well. But it's you just want to see him make more plays and kind of show the guy that he was because he popped as an emerging player these last couple of years and he was just not that this year.
All right. And I guess the last question I have is that for the defensive line as a whole is how important is it for this defensive line to get a little younger at this point?
I would say it's important. And again, Matabike being the unknown, but you you always want to be drafting and developing, or at least developing young defensive linemen. It's a very tough position to play. There's always injuries. There's because guys fall on ankles, guys fall on knees. You get sprained ankles, knees, pulled muscles, and you losing 3 or 4 games, and for an entire defensive line to be as healthy as they were this year is, that's the rare feat. So being able to have multiple guys that are young, ready, and able to contribute is vitally important. I mean, yeah, Pierce has been injured, a guy that's injured most years of his career. This was the rare exception. Brent Urban he's going to be what 33 or 34
Mhm.
next year. That that's getting old. Even though Matabike, Jones, and Washington they're younger, but you just want to be able to churn and keep churning and bringing in more guys and bringing in some young guys.
Yeah, it worries me a little bit about Urban in particular, even though he's valuable to the team in terms of being, on the roster by handshake and not in actuality when that first cut is made because it gives you the extra players. I do think this is potentially a year where the Ravens find some guy, whether he's a UDFA or a draft pick, that they really like in camp, that they fall in love with him. And Urban might have to start the year on the practice squad, and the Ravens will just hope he's still there when their need arises. So it would not shock me if that would happen. And honestly, then it means it really wouldn't shock me if some other team grabs him, because one of the positions where the replacement level certifiably drops significantly as the year goes on is on the defensive line. It happens at cornerback. It happens at a lot of places, but on the defensive line, you definitely have a shortage. And one of the first places opposing GMs look is on the Baltimore practice squad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've been poached plenty of times, and you know, yeah, you just always want to have that next guy come in the pipeline, though.
Brandon, always a pleasure to talk football with you. These are only supposed to be 30 or 40 minutes long, but I thought we had some great material you went over on stunting and twisting there. Really appreciate your background and understanding on this. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
Sure. I'm on Twitter at Brandon Croxton 5. Looking forward to an big Oriole season, and looking forward to seeing the moves that the Ravens make over these next few months. So, yep.
All right. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short, we will be starting another historical one. I'm thinking of a couple ideas, but if you just have interest in a historical pod and doing one with me, whether it is at the player level, the game level, the play level, whatever it might be, hit me up with a DM on Twitter. I'll get back to you very quickly. And as always, other ideas are fine too, and we'll figure out how to make that into a pod. Brandon, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. Love to be here.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.